Well, good evening, and thank you all for joining us for an amazingly informative and crucial program, No Home for the Holidays. I'm Sivia Tamarkin. I'm president of National Council of Jewish Women, Arizona. For those of you who may not know our organization, a brief introduction that we are a progressive social justice organization that advocates to preserve the rights and improve the quality of life of women, children, and families. So a variety of issues fall into our domain. Homelessness certainly is something that we are very concerned about. The issue is one that has become critical in Arizona, certainly around the country, but Arizona has a rising homeless population. And of course, with the growth in this community comes the downside and the collateral damage. The housing boom here, of course, has resulted in a lack of affordable housing, lack of jobs, and unemployment, COVID have all put great stress on the system, where we do not have enough shelter beds and we do not have enough facilities, as hard as everybody is trying to eliminate these shortages. So tonight we're going to look at the issue, and I am going to turn the program over to our board member, Barbara Lukowitz, who started her career with experiencing and meeting people who are dealing with homelessness when she ran the YWCA Haven House back in 1998. While operating that transitional domestic violence shelter, Barbara immersed herself in county, city, and state activities related to other types of housing and homelessness. She worked in education, housing, and natural resource policy for former Arizona Congressman Bob Stump in Washington, and she's delivered many local, state, and national conference speeches on the rise of seniors experiencing homelessness. In fact, she coined the phrase silver tsunami on that issue. Barbara currently serves on the City of Phoenix Homelessness Task Force to develop strategies and plans for the issue, while running her own consulting firm. And I want to thank Barbara for bringing this tremendously experienced and very, very well recognized panel together. So Barbara?
Thank you very much, Sivia. And I thank you to everyone who's joining us on Zoom this morning. Or this evening. We really have a fabulous panel of experts, and we're going to talk about different aspects of individual people or families experiencing homelessness. And we're also going to talk about the impact on our neighborhoods and our cities. We're going to let each panelist speak to their individual expertise, and then we're going to have open questions and answers. Please post any, we have some questions that people have sent me in advance, but if you have additional questions, please post them in the chat and we'll make sure. In addition, because we want these very experienced people to have time to discuss and talk about homelessness, we will have the bios posted on our website. I'll try to introduce each of them separately. So we'll start with Darlene Newsome. And Darlene joins us as a recently retired executive director. She worked in the nonprofit sector in Arizona for over 44 years. She served as the chief executive officer at UMOM New Day Centers. This started in 2002. And under her leadership, really, and I watched it, and was covetous actually, UMOM expanded its capacity and improved the services offered to families, single women, and youth experiencing homelessness. She oversaw a $25 million agency budget and 280 employees. And during her years at UMOM, she completed a $24 million capital campaign. She relocated the existing family shelter. She expanded the capacity. She led the acquisition of Tumbleweed for youth development, so services for homeless youth. And UMOM then became its own affordable housing developer. And that means that Darlene and her company added 520 affordable units and 120 in construction. And so this makes her one of the primary experts on serving families who are experiencing homelessness. Please welcome Darlene Newsom.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And now you can kind of see how I retired. I had a lot going on at UMOM, but you know, I'm going to speak a little bit about homeless families, go into affordable housing, and then talk about women who are homeless. But I'll try to be brief because I know there's a lot of questions and we have a lot of panelists. But, you know, homeless families, once again, I feel are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. Now, I know there's others on the panel. I think all segments are fastest growing at this point, given the economy. But, you know, homeless families are one of the fastest growing. And, you know, if you don't think there's homeless families out there, you know, you're wrong. And you probably can identify some of the homeless families. You know, you may stop at a gas station and see a family with a bunch of their luggage in the car and think, oh boy, you know, they're probably taking a trip, not even thinking that this possibly could be a homeless family. A lot of times, like youth, they're like the invisible homeless. They're not as visible as the other homeless who are living on the streets, because many are either living in their cars or they're living doubled and tripled up someplace else. So they're not as identifiable. And many times people ask me, you know, why are people homeless? Why are families homeless? And there's so many different reasons, but research points to homeless. Usually it's a lack of affordable housing, which we've all read about, we've all heard about. You know, especially here in Phoenix, where rents have gone up 45% and wages have gone up 10 to 15%. So the gap is getting wider. And also there's a lack of a safety net is something we hear a lot of. If they just have a bump in the road, you know, they're living in an apartment with their family and their car breaks down, they need the car to get to work, but they have to fix their car. Do they pay their rent? But if they don't go to work, they can't eventually pay their rent. So, you know, they get into this bind. And I think also you have to talk about generational poverty. There is generational poverty that we see from generation to generation. And then we see some real bad choices that they make in their lives for whatever reason. Sometimes that choice may be their partner that they partner with, and they end up in a domestic violence type situation. So there's a lot of different reasons why a family ends up homeless. But, you know, our thing at UMOM was always that everyone deserves an opportunity to have a better life, a better quality of life. And we talked a lot about screening families in, not screening families out. And I know that, you know, UMOM is the central point for all families that come into the Valley. So if you're a homeless family, the federal government has said, HUD has said, you go to one point of entry, and that point of entry knows all the family shelter beds available, you know, where the affordable housing is. And so we call it the Family Housing Hub. And I've heard through the grapevine since I've retired from UMOM that at one point this last year, our wait list was around 60 families, but within 30 days, it popped up to 250 families. So you can imagine, you know, in Phoenix right now or Maricopa County, there is, you know, 250 families who do not have a permanent place to stay. And one of the things we do is we prioritize the families. The families that are living on the streets have first entry into the shelter. So we have priority 1 and priority 2. You can imagine we probably never get to that priority 2 because they do have a place to stay temporarily. We just don't have enough resources. We just don't have enough shelter beds. We've never had enough shelter beds. And people used to ask me, now, when are you going to retire? And I used to always say, I'm not going to retire until there's 0 families on the wait list. But then I started to figure out that I'm going to be real old when I retire. I'm going to be over 100. I wish that I couldn't say that, but that's just the way it is. We don't have enough resources, and fortunately, I think, and unfortunately, through the COVID, I have never thought we would see as much money as we see now coming into this state to really assist the most vulnerable who live in our community. And it's a great opportunity for us to have an impact in those families and those individuals who live on the street. Now, UMOM is the largest shelter, but Cass also operates a family shelter. There's Save the Family, there's the Salvation Army, there's New Leaf. There are other shelters, and we all coordinate and work together. And that's all through that one point of entry. So when a family comes into shelter, one of the things is that we really want the homelessness to be brief and non-reoccurring. We want to get them in a home permanently as soon as possible, because we know that that's the number one stabilizing factor for a child, is to be in a permanent home. And we all know it's about the children. And so we really work to make that stay as brief as possible. But the way we do that is through 45 different contracts. We have a lot of partners who help us. So it's just not UMOM. We have 45 different subcontracts of community agencies that work closely with us, like the Boys and Girls Club and Phoenix Children's Hospital and Circle the City, because the philosophy really has to do with a wellness philosophy of spiritual and physical and emotional well-being. Because all of us know that it's really hard to move forward in your life unless you feel good. And so that's always been our approach with our families and with our women. The other thing I do want to mention is that when you think about homelessness, in my years of working with youth homelessness, women and families, is that it really comes down to income and employment plus housing is going to end homelessness. That is the formula. That is the equation. And that's what we work towards at UMOM at the Halley Women's Center, is really looking at making sure that we can take care of the medical needs. We have employment center, we have employment fairs, we have a job training program, but we also work on that housing element. Rapid rehousing is one of our interventions that's very effective with families, where we can place a family in an apartment, pay their rent for a period of time, and lower that support over a 9-month period until they get stabilized in a job. And then they remain in that apartment and continue. So rapid rehousing nationally, it's a best practice. The other approach is we became our own developer, and we're a LIHTC developer. We develop apartments from the ground up, and we can't build them fast enough. And I think today we have about 700 units. We have about 200 units in construction right now. And the units range from, families to 55 and over. We just opened a couple of years ago. South 7th Village was for 55 and over, with an emphasis on veterans. And the rents range in these complexes anywhere from like $550 a month to $1,000 a month, depending on your income. And most of it's based on 30, 40, 50% of the average median income. So most everybody who lives in these units has some type of income, and most likely they make under $35,000 a year. So I do want to touch just briefly on the Halley Women's Center, because we did not have a full service shelter for homeless women until 2017. And what we had before that was a warehouse, and it was a warehouse on Watkins where the women could come during the day, but they had to leave. But they could come at night, but they had to leave during the day. And you can only imagine what happened to these women during the day when they had to leave the facility. And so my goal was, we got to open a full service shelter where women can stay during the day, work on employment, work on counseling, work on whatever issues they have. And so I just want to share one stat, is that when we were at the big warehouse where the women had to leave during the day, our exits to permanent housing was around 15%. When we moved them to the full service Halley Women's Center, the exits to permanent housing rose to 70+%. So it goes to show you that if you can keep these individuals and these families and work with them during the day and keep them focused on that employment, income, and housing, you really can have a successful model in ending homelessness. Did I take too much time? I'm
No,
sorry.
Darlene, it was great. Thank you so much. And there was really only one question that came up, but it was more of a general question. So I think we'll move on to our next panelist, and that's Jana Scott. I'm proud to have Jana here on this panel. I specifically suggested Jana because she would be able to speak about the faith community's participation in homelessness. And Jana has a huge bio that I can't read all of it, but let's just say that she recently, she was involved in the Napolitano administration. She was involved in the Obama administration. She has been she actually started her ministry, as she mentioned earlier when we were all talking, as a counselor at UMOM. She's been involved in the chaplaincy at the Human Services campus. And I'm very proud to say that Jana is the director and the consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Central Arizona Shelter Services. She's an amazing colleague, and she's here to speak to you about how faith communities can be involved in homelessness or in ending homelessness. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to the National Council of Jewish Women. My director, CEO, Lisa Blow, is also one of the speakers, and we had actually organized a tag team presentation where Lisa would give a short intro, but I guess
go ahead. If you want to do it that way, that's fine with me. We're very zen at the National Council of Jewish Women. Go ahead.
We're very grateful for that.
Sure.
So Sydney, if we could let Lisa give a little intro, then I'll do the short
Sure.
PowerPoint slide.
Hi, my name is Lisa Glow. I've been at CAST now for 4 years as the CEO. Never imagined this is what I'd be doing in my career. I wound my way here from practicing law, then working in government, including with Janet Napolitano, and then doing community work where I really found my passion and where my heart is. And I really resonate with what you're talking about. Social justice is a big part of what we're trying to address with homelessness. The brief overview is CAST is Arizona's largest homeless emergency shelter for adults in the state. We have the 470-bed shelter in downtown located on the Human Services campus. That's for individuals 18 and older. We're going to be expanding to 600 beds. We're also renovating that shelter to be open next summer, so it's a trauma-informed environment. We have a smaller family shelter, as Darlene mentioned, in Sunny Slope. We're going to be opening a permanent facility for seniors. I'll talk about that later, in a new hotel model. And we opened a center in Glendale in December of 2020, the Norton and Ramsey Social Justice Empowerment Center. So that's a very broad overview of CAST. Jana, I know your presentation is to give some key facts to set the stage for needed solutions, but then also talk about your work with DEI and the faith community, and we'll keep it clipping along. Back to Jana.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Barbara. I really enjoy working with Barbara. She has been just a light and very brilliant in this arena. So thanks for the opportunity. Very quickly, we just wanted to put into context for those who may not know, I know a lot of you on here do, but where we are with homelessness. And Darlene talked about some of this. how household income has gone up 11% over the 5 years that were tracked, but rent went up 36%. And it's probably up in the 40s, like Darlene said, now based on what happened in 2021. Next slide. We've got about 7 slides here, and Sydney's going to be helpful. This one is interesting because it gives you a sense of the numbers of programs and different types of services that are currently in our county. 912 different programs providing a plethora of services and supports. And this one in particular is interesting because it shares that based on the data from the census, 22% of households reported that an eviction is very likely in the next couple months. So we're hoping that we don't see another tsunami of homelessness, but the data doesn't look good right now. Next slide. So who's experiencing homelessness? And both Lisa and Darlene hit on several of these populations, but the primary reason I think is really interesting, and that is that as people come into homelessness, 50%, if you add the first 4 categories, talk about overcrowding, economics, eviction, or loss of employment as a reason for homelessness. And, obviously people have double and triple situations that they're dealing with, but these reasons I think are really telling for where we are today. Next slide, please. 7,419 people experienced homelessness in Maricopa County in January of 2020. 49% of them were sheltered, 51% were unsheltered, meaning they did not have a place that was meant for human habitation. Next slide. You can see from this slide some of the racial and ethnic as well as age background. And this is a slide that is really important for us, particularly in the DEI realm, as we look at race and ethnicity. You can see, for instance, that certain populations, African American in particular, represent a larger proportion of the population in sheltered and unsheltered populations than they do in the general population. This is not new or specific just to Arizona. It's a phenomena that is nationwide and one that we are all grappling with. Next slide. So the CAS approach in our DEI, our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that's our mantra, is to establish a compassionate, grace-filled culture where staff and clients experience a sense of belonging. And we're establishing an internal group, we're building diverse partnerships, we're demonstrating and tracking wins, and we are examining client outcome data. We just started that with a race equity tool that Maricopa Association of Governments established. This is a long process, and we're hoping that this first year we'll be able to make some progress, but it's like turning a big ship when you look at the system as a whole. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm so grateful to not only Lisa and the board, but also the funders who saw this work important enough to make a commitment to it. Next slide. I wanted you to see this picture because for me, this really shows the diversity of people experiencing homelessness. And we're asking you to join us in challenging assumptions and finding new solutions. And the last slide, please. So how can you help? First and foremost, for those of you who don't know, CAS is an Arizona tax credit organization. You can get people to donate to CAS. Each dollar you give as a single, you get it back on your taxes up to $400, $800 for couples. And all of that is reimbursable on the Arizona state taxes. And you can go to our website to find out more information, casaz.org. In addition, winter is coming. Sheltered and unsheltered folks can use things like sweatpants, sweatshirts, socks, underwear. It's important to know how to refer people to help. Darlene talked about the Family Hub. There's a specific number that families experiencing homelessness can call to get on the list, the by name list, to be able to get referred for housing. Same thing with single adults without children. So I'm hoping that people will be able to take these numbers. And of course, Barbara has our information as well, so I'm sure she'll get it to you. But with that, I just want to encourage you. There are many other ways you can help. I know that the council talked about being an advocate and a spokesperson for different issues, and we always need people to champion ways that we can help improve the lives and the life chances of those who experience homelessness. And with that, I want to turn it back to Lisa or to Barbara if you have more you want to say about Lisa before she speaks. Thank you very much.
Barbara, I could take 2 more minutes because I know you need to clip this along and be done.
Oh, we're good. I just feel bad that I didn't talk about your bio at the same time I talked
Put
about.
it in there. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Don't feel bad. Yeah, I too love working with you, Barbara. She's incredible and dedicated. And let me say a couple of follow-up things from the slide. 70% of the state's homeless population is in Maricopa County. And we have the faster growing numbers of anywhere in the state, particularly with the unsheltered population. That means we don't have enough shelter beds and we have more people becoming homeless. The data that was shared about the single night count is a significant underrepresentation of the number of people who are actually experiencing homelessness. It's probably 3 or 4 times that. That's nationally believed about that number because you don't capture everybody on a single night, people who are couch surfing, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a lot of hope on the horizon. Right now, there's a lot of federal money coming in under the CARES Act and under the American Rescue Plan. CAS has just secured funding to be able to purchase a hotel, which we call Project Haven, and it is to help address the silver tsunami, which Barbara did capture my attention 4 years ago when I started at CAS. And I looked around and there were so many gray-haired individuals with wheelchairs and walkers and lost and confused in our 470-bed shelter. And I was like, something is not right here. She was working at Justice Center. So it was then we started working on building better program models for the seniors. We've made significant progress. We opened a temporary shelter in a hotel, a rental for 15 months during the pandemic so that those most elderly folks and medically vulnerable people didn't have to stay in a congregate shelter. And Barbara helped us set up the programs there. And the purchasing of the hotel, there's some news tonight about it, is really exciting. A more dignified space for up to 170 elderly individuals to stay, have their own rooms. Elderly couples can stay together, and you'll hear more about it. But those are the kind of innovations we have to have. The other thing you're going to be hearing more in the community, and this is as a result of the Maricopa Association Government Planning and City of Phoenix, we need to regionalize and build more shelters throughout other regions, not just all in downtown Phoenix or one community. And not only shelter, but also housing. But we can't build the housing quickly enough. So our moral obligation, I believe, is to open places now to get people off the streets for adults, families, veterans, seniors. I'm going to pause there. I'm not going to talk about the Norton Ramsey Social Justice Empowerment Center. I'll leave that for later so other people have their time. And if there is time, I'll tell you about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa and Jana. And before we move on to our next speaker, who will really talk about his lived experience, he experienced homelessness. I want to share you a few questions that we received in the chat, and anybody on the panel can really answer them. One of them is, Phoenix have more homeless people than other cities? Do they migrate here because of the warm weather? Would anybody like to weigh in on that?
Last data I saw was we're about 8th highest in the nation overall numbers compared to other large cities. They're here in the summer and the winter. We see the same numbers in terms of the adult population, but we do have a growing problem and other people are coming from other states here too.
Darlene, any input on families? Is there a difference between summer and winter?
No, I don't think there's a difference, but what I hear a lot of families say that have moved here recently is they've been told that there's jobs and there's housing and there's great opportunity, and then they get here and they find out that's not the case. So they get here and they've heard things that are not true, that might have been true 10, 15 years ago, but it's not true
Right.
today.
Another quick question before we move on to Justin is, can volunteer tutors come to you, Mom, or to Vista Colina to help the kids with their homework?
Well, I'm not at UMOM right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they have volunteers coming back in. I do know that we had quite a few volunteers before. We had a lot of kids from Brophy that would come in and volunteer and tutor our kids. And we had a lot of, volunteers coming into the Read to Me program on Tuesday evening. I am not sure that they've started up the volunteer program again because of COVID and some of the protocols. So they would have to call UMOM or visit their website and see what type of volunteer opportunities there are.
And we would love to explore doing that. We're in the process at our family shelter of transforming the programs. We haven't had much participation in our childcare program, and it's not becoming, it's economically unfeasible to keep those classrooms open. So we're retooling the classrooms into a vocational training center. Maybe we'll do tutoring, and we are also going to make one area into a therapy and counseling area. I see there's a question there. Yes, volunteer psychologists, psychiatrists. We're in the process of putting that programming together. We surveyed our families. They said what we need are this, that, and the other thing. So perfect time for us to do that transformation while the childcare program is not seeing the kids. 60% of the residents at our family shelter are children, though. So we certainly have them, and they do certainly need help with tutoring. So we'll get back to you on that.
Yes. So next I want to introduce Justin Jones. And Justin, they are currently working at 1 in 10, but tonight they are representing themselves as a person who formerly experienced homelessness. I actually met Justin when he was living at home base, and I was working for Native American Connections and helping to raise money to build more units, as Darlene likes to say. So please give your attention to Justin and understand that his story is one that's often experienced by youth aging out of the foster system and or people who are expelled from their homes when they come out. So Justin, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Barbara, for your kind and warm words. Let me just say that, isn't it very fortunate that we're, like, some of us are in a place of our comfort in our home, and just be always thankful and grateful for that. So let me go ahead and get started with my story. So sorry if I go off, and I'm just gonna read a little something I wrote. From an early age, I experienced tragedy. First, when my mother was sadly murdered shortly after my birth, and later I watched my father slowly kill himself of alcohol. At 16, I moved to Arizona to live with my aunt and cousins, and they taught me the most about the importance of service in the community. I would later come out as queer to them. Moving on, after experiencing some homelessness because of some hardships and some of my own financial hardships, I was able to live independently with the aid of transitional housing programs through Native American Connections home base. Again, that's where I met Barbara. And 1 in 10's Promise of a New Day PON program. Later, I would become a proud youth leader with 1 in 10, where they would serve LGBT youth ages 11 to 24. Recently, I earned a AmeriCorps certificate for national service and completing 17,000 hours of community service and learning. On the national stage, I represented Arizona and advanced the overall mission of the Human Rights Campaign, becoming HRC's Arizona's youngest steering committee member for 2 years, in 2017 and 2018. I also worked for HRC as the youth ambassador in 2019, thanks to Bobby Lancaster and Deborah Martinez III, and the Obama Foundation as an Obama Fellow in 2019, thanks to Brandon Holmes. Through my adversary and misfortune, I became masterful at building relationships. and always willing to chip in for duties for LGBT events and efforts. And I've also attended and volunteered for several charity events benefiting homeless and at-risk LGBT youth in the city of Phoenix. Today, I work at Winnington as a youth center program specialist, and I run two groups. I run the Queer Youth of Color group and the Trans and Gender Nonconforming group. And I hope to inspire every person I come across and become the change I want to see in the world. Thank you. One more thing. With all my experience and all my work, I want to say to you that our trans and gender nonconforming folks are the most at risk, or one of the most at risk for being homeless, for being who they are. What are you going to do to make that change? Thank you.
Wow, Justin, that was a very powerful statement, and I know it was from your heart. And thank you for stimulating our minds to think about that particular aspect of service in our communities. I know that you'll continue to be a leader, and I know that it's a very emotional thing to share your story. So I want to thank you and tell you that I think every day you're very brave, and I'm proud to be your friend.
I want to say thank you, Barbara. You've been more than just a mentor. Again, I always say I look at you like a mom. You've been the closest thing to a mom to me. And then I get to work at my greatest, like the greatest job on earth. I'm working at Winnington. I'm here right now, and it's like I'm at the biggest playground on earth. Thank you.
So our last speaker, before we get into a ton of questions, is Jeff Spellman. And Jeff Spellman is important to this panel because he's going to talk to us about the neighborhoods and the coalitions that we can form in order to locate shelters or other living spaces for people experiencing homelessness in different parts of the city. It doesn't have to be centralized in downtown. And Jeff is the head of the Violence Impact Project Coalition. He also serves on the task force for strategies to end homelessness for the city of Phoenix. And my favorite part is that he was a park ranger for the city of Phoenix for many, many years, and is a great hiker and outdoors person. I really kind of envy that job because that seems like the perfect job for somebody who loves to be outdoors. But let's have Jeff present to you his view of how we can make good neighbors in our neighborhoods and with the neighborhood coalitions to talk about how we can welcome people experiencing homelessness into our neighborhood and help them. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and good evening, everybody. Jeff Spellman from the Violence Impact Project Coalition. It's really interesting and exciting that we're talking about this evening. I just came from a very special celebration, I guess you would call it, with Lisa Glow and others from CAS, as we had a media event at the location that will be the future Project Haven 2. And it was a ceremonial signing of our Good Neighbor Agreement with CAS and how they will operate that shelter. And that's probably the gist of the message that I want to share with everybody tonight is, I've been a neighborhood advocate for a long time. I've been involved with Block Watch and working with neighborhood leaders to solve problems. And people experiencing homelessness, the encampments, the trash, and all those things, those are the things and the impacts that show up in neighborhoods. And a lot of people have challenges with that. It's not that people don't want to help or find ways to help, but it really is the impacts on neighborhoods. It's on businesses. Sometimes there's crime associated with it. And so when the city of Phoenix, the city council, passed their strategy plan on addressing homelessness, it had 8 different sections in that plan. The neighborhood section was the last section. Many of the neighborhood leaders weren't really happy with what that plan addressed. It really just talked about trying to educate neighbors more about what kind of resources were available to them to solve problems. It really didn't address the real issues and impacts on neighborhoods. And so a number of the neighborhood leaders from around the city got together And we talked about what it is that we were looking for in terms of mitigating these issues on neighborhoods. And we came up with some consistent points. We presented those consistent points to the city council in their council meeting. The main key point was that we wanted some sort of oversight or committee. And what that ultimately ended up becoming in the council's recommendation was the task force. And so, you know, I, along with several others, there's about 4 neighborhood leaders that serve on the task force. And as we've gone through a review of each of the 8 sections, we've all kind of come to this consensus that if we would do all the other areas right, like issues with housing and shelter and services and all the things that we need to do, if we did all those things right, there would be no negative impacts on neighborhoods. We wouldn't even need a neighborhood section. But the fact is that we do. And the fact is that you've already heard that there's a shortage of housing beds, facilities. And, you know, one of the key strategies in this council approved document was that we would have these smaller specialized shelters spread out throughout the city, located in neighborhoods and not concentrated in any one area. You already heard Lisa in her opening comments talk about when she first came to Cass and said, look, you know, I'm looking around and seeing all these seniors, and this is not a good environment for them to, you know, to have success. We need to find better ways. So I know Lisa and Cass has been advocating for this idea, especially for seniors, for a long time. And so as this conversation continued, you know, the idea of where would one of these facilities be located at? This was not a new idea, by the way. Back in the 90s, under the city of Phoenix had a bond program, and it was very well supported and funded to provide these smaller specialized shelters in other areas of the city. And when they first proposed the first one north of Camelback Road, the neighborhoods all came out and total opposition. The entire program was shut down. It never went anywhere. And so we were kind of, you know, concerned about this idea of again, putting shelters in neighborhoods, and how would the neighborhood people respond to that? Would they just push back and say, no, not in my neighborhood. I don't want that here. I don't want that problem here. But in my neighborhood, I live in the area of I-17 and Northern on the I-17 corridor. We're plagued with a lot of homeless encampments in the area. And so, and people here, I think, are mostly from, you know, the lower income, working class people. Many people empathize with people experiencing homelessness. Many people realize this could be me tomorrow. And so I think we had a pretty good shot at, you know, having an opportunity to have one of these facilities in our neighborhood. We knew, you know, early on that it would be contingent on getting support from our community and from neighborhoods. So we started conversations very, very early on with Cass almost a year ago when they were starting to pitch this idea. I had already heard about the concept and the idea of converting hotels into shelters. You know, we had learned not long after that about Project Haven 1. It was kind of a big secret at the time. It was a temporary shelter for people vulnerable to COVID, and right over at 16th Street in Northern. And it's a pretty nice neighborhood area over there. And they rented room space there to house seniors that might be vulnerable to COVID. And I knew neighbors over there who lived over in that area. And I said, keep a close eye on what's going on there. And you let me know if you see anything. The neighbors who lived there never saw a single thing. In fact, I ride bicycles on the bikeways around there with several people in that area. We were riding by there one day, and we stopped in front of Project Haven 1, and we stopped and visited with a senior who was on his bicycle and going out on one of his appointments or something, I'm not sure. And we asked him, he didn't know who we were or anything. He told us his story and what happened to him. You know, it was a work injury that ended up causing him to lose his job. And he came back and he came out of the downtown campus and came up to Project Haven. And he just told us, you know, without even prompting, What a wonderful experience it was. You know, so much more dignity in a smaller specialized facility like that, their own room with their own restroom. It was just amazing. So we heard that story. And so, you know, Cass worked really hard over the course of the last year to provide tours to all of our neighborhoods. Anybody who was interested, they would host tours so that we could see how that was working, because we knew what we would be fighting. As soon as you said the word shelter, we always try to figure out how do we call it something else other than a shelter. And I don't think we ever agreed on what we call it. But bottom line is it's a shelter. And so as soon as you say the word shelter, people immediately think about the Human Services campus. And their reaction is, no, I don't want that in my neighborhood for sure. But when we could point to 16th Street and Northern and say, look what happened here, would you be okay with that in our neighborhood? And, you know, pretty soon people were saying, yeah, I think that would be okay. So we kind of went to work. We went to work working more with Cass and also with the city of Phoenix, discussing these ideas. Would you be willing to, you know, take into consideration all of the concerns that we might have about it operating, how it would operate? They promised that it would be a closed campus. People wouldn't be lining up outside and camping outside waiting for services. And they agreed to really everything that we had talked about. We ended up putting that into a good neighbor agreement, and that's what we signed publicly before the media today. Out on site was that good neighbor agreement. The other thing we did was working closely with the city of Phoenix and their staff to as they developed their site plan for that facility. So a site plan is something that can be submitted to the zoning through their zoning request, and it can be stipulated. So they presented and created a site plan that addressed all of the security issues, fencing, lighting, everything, and even went beyond the bounds of the facility, where they were making some improvements and taking responsibility for maintaining a pedestrian paseo that's adjacent to the facility, providing some security around the area. They were willing to do all of these things. And so we got them in the good neighbor agreement, we got them in the site plan, and we got a very long list of stipulations that would be presented to the zoning administrator when they went for their use permit. This was the ticket. It really was the ticket. Between the use permit and the good neighbor agreement was the ticket to getting neighbors to believe that they would be good to their word and how they would operate in a neighborhood, and that it would help us solve problems, not add to problems. And so that use permit, the list of stipulations, I've been involved in a lot of zoning cases involving neighborhoods, and I've never seen a use permit with that many stipulations approved by the zoning administrators I did in this case. Even a marijuana dispensary doesn't have that many stipulations approved for it. So these were the tickets to assurance to the neighborhood that it would operate well and it would not have the impacts that we might be concerned about. So this is a neighborhood that, you know, we are not the NIMBYs, we're the YIMBYs. We're the ones that are saying, yes, in my backyard, bring it here. We want to be part of the solution. And we knew that we had to absolutely get this first one done and done right. And so that's why we spent so much time on it. Lisa and her team, they literally did everything that we could have possibly asked for and more. On top of that, you know, we were also concerned that I-17 in Northern was not exactly the same situation as 16th Street in Northern. At I-17 in Northern, there's a lot of crime and drug dealing and drug use in that area. And we said, this cannot be allowed to happen in this area where Project Haven is going to locate. We don't want these seniors coming and going from Project Haven and potentially get exposed to criminality on the street as they're trying to get to the bus and so forth and appointments. So the city of Phoenix actually worked with us and created a public safety plan for the area immediately around Project Haven. Now, it hasn't changed the dynamic there yet. They literally just announced the plan to us, and we're literally in our coalition meeting going to be talking with the chief of police and other department heads involved in this on Monday evening to talk about our priorities and where we want them to focus their energy. But to us, this was the key to getting this first smaller specialized shelter in a neighborhood, getting the neighborhood to accept it and to create a model for others to follow. Now, there's one other RFP that's already been approved, and they're kind of going through that process now. And the city is going back to possibly do additional RFPs for more shelters in neighborhoods. So that's kind of where we're at on that with the neighborhood stuff. So I'll be quiet now and get ready for
Well,
questions.
we have quite a few questions that have been posed. Some of the people are answering in the chat, but I have some questions that were sent directly to me. And so I'd like to pose them to the panel and just jump in. So really, this first question that was sent to me is really good. Someone asked me, are our cities and towns or the state doing enough to help homeless people? And so jump right in and tell me and if you can, keep your questions pretty short, if you don't mind, because I have another 6 questions that were sent to me. So anybody want to jump in on that one?
I'm going to say crisis does lead to people working together for solutions. So a lot of positive things are coming out of the pandemic. There's a lot of federal money as well. So definitely the cities are working very hard. The county, I think the state can step up more. We're hoping to run a bill this session and would love your organization to weigh in favor. We need more operating dollars. So we're going to open new facilities with this federal money. We're going to need operating dollars from the state, and the state needs to also do a state plan.
Yeah, I just want to jump in too. Before the pandemic, the state to me was doing nothing. They had $5 million statewide for all populations to serve the homeless. 5 million statewide. State of Massachusetts probably had, I think, 400 million, if not more, to serve the state of Massachusetts. And so, no, we were not doing enough to assist the homeless. And I think the city of Phoenix, before the pandemic, was contributing around 20 million. And I still feel that was not enough. But the state was 5 million. And we constantly had every group advocating for additional dollars. And we had no success down at the state legislature. So, I think we don't have a lot of success in a lot of areas, but it was very frustrating. And that's why we really had to beef up a lot of our fundraising activities, because most of our budget, 50% of it was private funding.
So our next question, and I think I'm going to direct this to Jana because it seems fairly specific that she can answer. Jana, if it were up to you, what would be the one thing to do regarding Arizona's homeless situation for people of color?
I think to care about it. That's the first. If we get people to care, then that caring, that compassion, that concern can lead to a lot of positive outcomes. So if anybody wants to care, let me know, and I can hopefully get you engaged with what we're trying to do with that.
Justin, the same question was addressed to you. What would be the one thing that we can do to help youth who are experiencing homelessness?
For me, as far as youth experiencing homeless, is just to understand where they're at. Understand that it's okay to give a welcoming hand, but not everyone accepts that. Sometimes you have to meet them where they are.
Thank you. We already talked about shelters being in different neighborhoods or in, one location. I think Jeff was very good about explaining that. So the next question is really, how do we really pay for sheltering people? Should we raise our taxes? I mean, some people want to know how that works. And a corollary question, a corollary to that question was, are they destroying low-income housing in order to build luxury apartments, and what do we do about that? So jump right in, panel.
Okay.
That's a good one.
I'm going to jump in on both of those. I always talked about ending homelessness was all our responsibility. And I think a piece of it has to come from the church, the faith-based community, the government, corporations. I think we all play a part in ending homelessness. I do not think it's just the government's responsibility. And there's so many different ways we can help. If it's not dollars, it's donations and volunteering. And yes, there are apartments that are people put a new coat of paint on and they raise the rent $500 a month. And that is helping, that is happening. But there are policies that can be passed that can prevent some of that. I think it was the city of Tempe recently passed something that, we cannot lose any more affordable housing units. So, yeah, so to prevent some of that displacement from happening, because we can keep building, but if we keep losing apartments to investors and raising the rent, we're going nowhere. So there has to be some type of moratorium on that. And there's a lot of different policies that can be changed in our state, such as we could adopt some inclusionary zoning, and rent controls probably will never happen. But as these luxury apartments go up, why not have 20% of the units below market rate and have more mixed income housing?
So I'm
We
trying to
used to
fit
have
in.
that, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to fit in as many questions, so please excuse me. I don't mean to cut anybody off. Lisa, somebody specifically asked, who should we talk to be involved in this issue? The person asked, you seem to know a lot about the advocacy, and who should we talk to and how can we be involved?
So we created something called the Homeless Solutions Alliance at CAS, which is exactly for the reason of advocacy. It was put together during the pandemic because we knew we needed to better coordinate our advocacy efforts. One thing I mentioned briefly is we have legislation we're going to work on introducing. We have a legislative tiger team and some consultants helping us facilitate it. And we think we have a Republican and a Democrat to introduce a bill. So as Darlene talked about the 5 million, that really needs to be 20 million every year. So we're going to be going for that. If you're interested in joining that, we also have a neighborhood tiger team. I'm pretty sure, Jeff, you're going to be on that. A tiger team really means it's time limited. We're taking on some very focused issue areas. I did that a lot in working with Napolitano. What is it we can achieve? What's the most important thing? And who can help advocate? So you can let us know. We'd love to put you on one of those two. The neighbor one is how do we make the business case and the neighbor case for these new solutions? And it does start always with that awareness. And so much has been achieved in some arenas. So if you want to be involved in that, quickly on what Darlene was saying, there are some efforts with Wildfire, an organization that is doing a lot of rental assistance, eviction prevention. They're going to be running some legislation year one on doing some eviction cleanup work, but then trying to do better legislation. We are backwards in our laws here, but we need to start asking for that. So if you want to join either of our things, we'd love to have you.
So I had a question. I'm sorry. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that before I go to the next question? All right. I had a very important question about what somebody thinks that mental illness might be a part, or experiencing a break in your psychic abilities and your psyche. What role does mental illness play in some of the more severe cases of homelessness that we see? And are these people resistant to becoming housed? It's a very interesting question.
I know Darlene sees that with families. We see a lot of it with the adults, and our low barrier shelter, the only rules for getting in, you do not have to be clean and sober, but you can't bring a weapon or drugs and alcohol with you. You don't have to have an income. Yes, a lot of people with serious mental illness do not want to come into a shelter with 500 other people. We need more appropriate treatment facilities. There are facilities that people go in and out of. We need better models, candidly. And I don't know that I have the solution, but I think the right conversations are happening. I don't know, Darlene, if you know of like, what's the best thing to do? I personally think we need a broader funnel. So it's not just you can go to this emergency shelter with 500 people. Like, here's an option for a small location where you can live and get stable. The Phoenix Rescue Mission model has some of that. UMOM has some of that. We need a bigger funnel and more appropriate.
I think we do. I agree with Lisa. And we need more services in the mental health area at all levels through, outreach, diagnosis, identification, treatment, specialized group homes, more support systems. We don't have that now. Back in the Reagan era is when we really released the mentally ill from the state hospital, but we failed to create that support system in the community to provide the services and the support that these individuals need. And that population has just been growing and growing ever since. So mental health is definitely, behavioral and mental health needs more funding and more specialized services to help these individuals, which includes family, includes children, to improve their mental health. I mean, it just doesn't exist at this point. And it's more of a turnstile that they go in to a place, they stay 24 hours and they're back out again, and they're not stable on their medication, and there's very little housing available.
I would recommend you'd have Lori Goldstein and someone from the Morrison Institute on the recent report that was done on the progress we have not made under Arnold v. Sarn. You would get a really eye-opening panel from that, because Darlene was talking about pieces of that, these group homes work, but we need about 20,000 more if we're going to do that model. I don't know what the real number is, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. So before we wrap this up, Jeff, would you like to comment on the role of mental illness in the neighborhoods and people in the encampments and in the neighborhoods? And then I think we'll wrap it up, but I'd like to hear from Jeff because of that neighborhood element.
I'm probably not the best one to talk about, who's experiencing mental illness, but certainly we see those impacts on neighborhoods. So I guess I would just kind of end with Barbara that, we certainly need more of these services out there. I think we need to find ways to bring people into appropriate shelters that work for every individual. There is no, one solution for everyone. We need a lot of different types of services out there and ways that serve people and kind of meet them where they're at.
Thank you.
That's as much as I can probably say on that.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Sivia. But first, I want to thank each and every one of you for serving on the panel. You all brought amazing insights and different insights to what we're doing. And I'll let Sivia wrap it up. And from the National Council of Jewish Women and the people who participated, which, by the way, this was one of the largest registered panels that we presented. Sivia, take it away.
Thank you, Barbara. And again, thank you to each of our panelists for all the information and insights that you brought to us. We at the National Council definitely want to work with you. Certainly when the legislation comes up, we will be in there assisting on legislative strategy and testimony, etc. I do want to tell Justin that we focus quite a bit on gender equity, and we have done a number of programs on that, on the difficulty of transgender students, particularly talking about our opposition and our testimony against the bills that were introduced here in the state to prevent transgender girls from participating in sports. So these are all issues we touch on. And homelessness is something that I think our legislative task force will be very involved with. We are getting our task forces underway. They have guidelines, they have direction, and now our team is reaching out to those who have signed up and offered to become involved. If you have not signed up, please reach out to us and tell us that you would like to participate. And our task forces are pertaining to protecting, promoting the vote, reproductive justice, legislative issues, and immigration. And we hope that you will participate and engage so that we can make a difference here. Also would like to, I could not resist playing off of the last comments, which were focusing so much on mental health and the need for support of mental health, to remind everybody that one of our signature projects at NCJWAZ is our current development is underway for Ruth Place, which will be the state's very first dedicated trauma recovery and treatment program for survivors of sexual assault and exploitation. We need your support. We need your assistance. So please keep that in mind as we launch our capital campaign. Please keep our work in mind, all of our advocacy initiatives. On November 30th, Giving Tuesday, we will send out reminders, but we cannot do our work just like any other organization that advocates for others without the financial support to carry on. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our board member, Barbara, for organizing this. And to all of you, we hope to see you involved and engaged and active with NCJWAZ. Good night.